Hi everybody, Lori here for Simon Says Stamp. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've got a fun, colorful project to share with you using some products from the latest Splendor release with Simon Says Stamp. I'm going to be featuring the new Mosaic Tulips layering stencil set. I love how the back of the packaging kind of gives you an idea of what the background would look like if you layered all three stencils, which is what I'm going to do. And here's what the three different stencils look like, just separately. You can use them separately, but I'm going to use them all together. I'm just going to be blending on a piece of just scrap paper. I have a panel here of Hammermill white cardstock, and I'm going to start blending with Cheeky ink. I'm going to be using all Pawsitively saturated inks, and all the supplies and colors and everything that I use will be listed in the description box below if you're watching on YouTube. Okay, so I'm starting with Cheeky. I'm using my large blender brush. These are the Simon Says Stamp large blending brushes. They're nice. They blend like butter. Here I am taking a little bit of Peachy and trying to get a nice seamless transition from the Cheeky into the Peachy. Okay, I'm going to be going in rainbow order because it makes me happy. But you could definitely customize the colors, do this same technique, and get a ton of different looks just by choosing different colors. Okay, bringing in a new color. This is Zest. This was also part of the Splendor release. It's a trio with butter, zest, and honey. And it's a great happy trio of yellows. Then next we have Celery. And I've said this before, but my blender brushes have been very well loved, sometimes with darker shades, sometimes with lighter shades. And as much as I try, I just grab a green blender brush. It's not always perfectly true, the color, although I do feel like I got a pretty true Celery, which is a very light limey green. And then here I'm bringing in Seafoam, also a very, very light aqua. And so getting a nice smooth transition from Celery into that Seafoam. One of my favorite color combinations when the Celery overlaps with the Seafoam. It's like a great tealy aqua happiness. Okay, now that we have a nice blended background, it doesn't have to be perfect because now we're going to lay on the stencil and start blending kind of tone on tone. And I'm just taping this down temporarily while I adhere the stencils. Now I have the sticky mats and I definitely use those a lot of times, but since I had already started on scratch paper, I just went with it. This is how I used to always do it. I do probably feel, if I'm being honest, I like just blending on scratch paper, and I do try to use the sticky mats. I know it's nice because it holds down your panel, holds down your stencil, and all that, but at the end of the day, sometimes you just like doing things the old way. You know what I mean? I don't know if anybody thinks the way I do, but okay. So here I pulled out the darker shades. So above I did Blush, and then here Grapefruit, and now I did the same with Zest. Even though I did Zest on the base layer, but Zest, when you give a little more elbow grease, you can really pump it up the volume. Now here's Limalicious, which is the darker shade after Celery. And that way you don't have to work quite as hard to get this tone on tone look with this first stencil layer. And then lastly, since I used Seafoam on the base, I pulled out the darker shade, which is Surf. And but if you don't have 1,000,001 inks, you could definitely use the same inks that you use for your base layer. Just lay on the stencil, use the same colors, just give it a little more elbow grease, go over a little heavier, and you can get the same look. But if you have the darker shades, it does make it easier and faster to get that nice contrast. Okay, so there you have it. A beautiful rainbow kind of tone on tone pattern. I'm laying on another stencil. I don't think that these are numbered. I don't even know if I'm going in numerical order or if you really even need to, but I pulled out the Distress Grit Paste in the Snowfall, which is just like a white Distress Grit Paste. It was handy. It was right there. And I thought, what about it? Let's try some paste. I used to have a tub of that Gina K Glitz Glimmer Paste. I love that one too. It's kind of a iridescent glitter paste. It's really beautiful. I would have used that if I knew where it was. That's my problem, is knowing where everything is. Like, I'm just starting to organize my inks. But there's a lot more to be done, people. Let me tell you. But this Snowfall Grit Paste looks beautiful. I let it sit for about an hour, and it's nice and hard now, and I'm going to lay on the next stencil. Now, this wasn't ideal order. I probably should have done the Grit Paste last, you know? But hey, I'm not a great think-aheader. I'll be the first one to admit it. But I was bound and determined to make this work. I'm too far in, people. It's too far to turn back now. But here, I'll tell you what, it worked. Now here I'm pulling out the even darkest shade of those trios. So on the bottom here, the base layer was Seafoam, the next layer was Surf, and here is Ocean, which is that darker teal. And I'm using the small blender brushes now because it's very little small dotted areas. You don't need a lot of ink and you don't need to cover a lot of area. Here we have Perfection, which is the darkest shade of the green trios that I used. And I'm kind of pressing in, trying to make sure I get in there. And because my stencil is slightly raised because of the paste. Now here I use Zest. I use Zest for all 3 layers, the base, the second, and the darkest. It can be done. Here we did Grapefruit again. I didn't pull out the darkest orange. This is the second. You just make it work. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's going to turn out fabulous because it's a layering stencil. And here we have Blush again. Just giving it a little once in all those little nooks and crannies. Okay, and it turned out fabulous. I'm happy to report. I wasn't sure if it was going to work trying to blend over top of the paste, but I'm happy to report it sure did work. And I'm very excited. Now, I am going to trim this down. I like to give it a nice little crop so that you have a little white border when you pop it up or adhere it down onto your white card base. So I generally cut off about 1/4 of an inch on all sides, sometimes more. It just depends on how thick you want your border to be. Sometimes I like a real thick border, but generally it's about 1/4 of an inch on all 4 sides. Using a little tape runner, I'm just going to adhere this flat on a white card base. A lot of times I pop up my panels, sometimes I don't pop them up. Either way, you know what? It looks beautiful. Here's the PRIVET branch. I think it's PRIVET. Sometimes I want to say Privet, but it's a nice little foliage die. It's not new, but any type of foliage die, sometimes try cutting it out with vellum. It's delightful, especially on a colorful background. A little vellum foliage does the trick. Now for the sentiment, I have the new fancy Lucky word die. I'm going to do the backer shadow out of vellum, the word die out of matte gold, and glue these together. Again, I'm not going to stack up the Lucky. A lot of times I do stack up. I'll cut a couple out of white, stack them up for more dimension. Sometimes I do that, but today I'm not. I'm just going to glue the matte gold Lucky die cut right onto that vellum shadow backer. I'm using a little Barely Art liquid glue and then just center it on that shadow backer. And then we have that swoopy L. I love how that just kind of swoops down underneath the word. And then to hold this so that it glues nice and tight onto the vellum, I just put one of the Simon Says Stamp acrylic blocks. Just let it marinate for a couple of minutes. And then here's some of these new sentiment strips. This is the Reverse Lucky, and this one says, "To have a friend like you." And I'm going to use my little mini guillotine to trim this out. I've already trimmed off another, you can see I've trimmed off a sentiment strip out of this already. These are my go-tos. I love the reverse ones, especially when you do a really colorful background. That white on black really pops with the contrast. So I trim this out to a thin little sentiment strip, and that's going to get paired with the Lucky. So here I am adding little strips of foam tape to the back, strategically behind those matte gold letters. That way you don't see it. And there's no adhesive put on that foliage. Just this word die with the foam tape is going to hold it down steady. And then I also am going to put a little foam tape on the back of my sentiment strip. And then I'm just going to nestle that right underneath the Lucky. So it's going to be like, "Lucky to have a friend like you." Here's some new Dazzling gems that came out in the Splendor release. I'm going to use several different colors. I have the Sunbeam, which are the yellow ones, then there's clear, and then there's rainbow ones. And I'm just gluing these down. I love the 3 different sizes, the cute little tubs they come in. You see the paw print on the lid, really adorable storage. And I'm using that Place and Peace embellishment wand to pick these gems up and stick them right where I want them to go. And this card is finished. So you've got colorful little bling kind of flanking that matte gold sentiment with that reverse sentiment strip. You've got that vellum foliage on top of that beautiful blended background with the grip paste. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure and check out the Splendor release if you haven't already done so over at Simon Says Stamp. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.
Hi there, I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at simonsaysstamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.